This is Ari Armstrong. I'm here with my father, Lynn Armstrong. And earlier this morning, the Denver area was the victim of another horrific mass murder. So we thought we would spend a few minutes talking, not about the crime itself, but about how Americans might think more about how to respond sensibly to these kinds of emergencies in the rare occurrence in a person's life that it might arise. And I think part of the problem is Americans simply aren't trained or taught anything about how appropriate ways to respond in these sorts of crisis situations. And so that's why I want to talk to my dad for a few minutes. So first, tell us just a little bit about your background in this sort of training arena.
Well, for the last 2 years we've done some work that Homeland Security sponsored, training law enforcement officers to respond to an active shooter like what we saw this morning. Could take place in a mall, movie theater, perhaps a school. In addition to that, this year we added a program where administrators, principals of schools were taught on what they could actively do to take down an active shooter. But it does take training, it takes some education. It's not rocket science as the term is used, but it's something that all of us can learn to do to make our lives safer when we have horrific incidents like this take place.
Well, and in the case of the Aurora crime, the police had a very rapid response. They were there within a couple of minutes of the first telephone call. And yet as fast as they got there, they still arrived on the scene after the crime was over, because they arrested him in the parking lot. So, short of receiving intensive training, is there anything the average American can do or think about? So what are the basics?
Absolutely.
There?
You know, we always recommend that if you can leave the area safely, do so. You have to learn how to do that too. You just can't run into an open area and hope you're going to be safe. You have to make sure there's not a shooter out there, and there's ways you can open doors to survey the area, and then you can lead people out or direct people out to a safer area. But the people in the movie theater, in some ways of thinking about it, had a lot of advantages to them. It was dark. Movie theaters are dark, so it was harder for him to see. The lights was shining probably in his eyes from the projector, if possible. And people need to be aware of the fact that if they would have picked up their purses, their drink glasses, anything they had in their hands, and if you had 100 people nearly simultaneously throwing these objects to him, he couldn't see. And then people have to be aggressive with the idea that they attack the individual. And the foremost expert on this is Alon Stevie. He's the one that put together what we call the ACT CERT program, where we train law enforcement officers certain aspects that they have to do with their job, and how we treat the ordinary citizen like yourself and the viewers out there watching this program on how they could survive a horrific incident like this and probably do it with very, very few casualties and be successful in doing it.
So to be clear, we're not talking about going out of your way to find trouble or tackle the bad guy, but we're talking about a scenario here where it was difficult, if not impossible, for a lot of the people to immediately escape. And so the option, to me, it seems like it's basically sit there or take aggressive action. Is that how you see it?
Well, if you don't take action, the option you have is to sit there and wait for the individual to do what he pleases to do. And that's not preferable to anyone. And so by taking an aggressive means, like I just talked about, people throw everything they have at their disposal towards this bad person. He's ducking, he can't see, even cups full of Coke would get in his eyes, he wouldn't be able to see. In this case, the shooter had a gas mask on, it would cover the lenses, he wouldn't be seeing, he'd be ripping that thing off. And there were people close to him, within a foot or two, and if they would have grabbed him with just a little bit of training so that they can control the muzzle of that firearm and take him down, and 3 or 4 people pile on top of this guy, that's the type of training we're talking about. And that's the type of training that Alon Stevie with his ACT CERT programs does. And that's online, how to get a hold of him, and there's home training that he has available for people that makes everybody's life safer.
Well, for somebody who doesn't have the training, or let's be realistic, most people aren't going to, is it realistic to think that a group of people can dogpile somebody in that kind of scenario?
Absolutely, absolutely realistic. But they've got to have done it a few times, and it does take hours of training, like you see some ninja on TV. It takes just a few minutes of a person's time to understand what's going on physiologically with their body and what's going on physiologically with the shooter's body. He has the same problems. He has tunnel vision, auditory exclusion. He cannot do fine motor control activities, and neither can the people that are potential victims. But there are things they can do that's very positive. They can throw objects, blind the individual. If somebody would have had a very strong flashlight at their disposal and shine that into his eyes so he's not seeing, then people have a reasonable chance to, and I don't like to use the term dogpile because that can create problems too, but if people have had just a little bit of training on how to take the guy's knees out, take control of his arms, which controls the firearm, then they can be successful in taking an armed individual down with probably no casualties.
Well, let's change directions. In Colorado, we have concealed carry laws, so a small but non-trivial portion of the population carries regularly concealed handguns. And I don't know what the policies were in this particular location, but let's talk about a situation where it's permissible to have a concealed carry. In a crowded scenario, is it feasible for somebody carrying concealed to safely respond to the attacker? Are there situations where it's okay or not okay, or what's your read on that?
Well, you don't want to create more casualties than what the shooter's trying to create, so you do have to be aware of what's behind your target. But if you aggressively attack the individual, move in closer so that you're assured of a good shot. And remember, this shooter had body armor from top of his head to his toes, but his face is uncovered, and so if you go directly towards that target with your firearm, he's going to go down. I still think that if one grandmother or mother out there would have had their pistol out and shot that guy right between the eyes, we probably wouldn't be having this talk.
Not on this day, anyway.
Well, and that's true. And I train a lot of civilian people to get their CCWs through firearms training, and about 50% of our classes anymore are women. And I'm frankly surprised that somebody in that auditorium wasn't able to pull out a firearm and dispatch this individual if they'd have been in a location that was able to do so. So if you're a long distance away, I don't expect you to respond and encourage you to leave the area. But if somebody's close and they have a firearm, they can certainly get into a close position so that they can take out the shooter and put him down.
So let's say a person does not want to put in the effort to get a concealed carry and train with that. Is there a way to spend just a few hours? What's available for the average citizen who does not want to spend a great deal of time researching it and looking into it and setting it up to get the basics on this? Is there a way at this point?
Sure. One reason that the ACT CERT program has been certified by the Homeland Security people is it's an easy program. It's something that anybody, whether you're 80 years old or 8 years old, can really learn the training on how to deal with these very serious and dangerous situations. And you can do it, your wife can do it, your grandchildren and children. And people in other parts of the world where the realities of terrorism takes place much more often than what it does in this country, they have schooling on this from time they start school till they're out of school, and military training. But you have to be trained to understand that there's certain things that you as the public do when you're confronted with a situation. Everybody unload with everything they have in their hands. Pop cans, beer cans, whatever party you're at, purses, anything that's heavy that's going to hit this individual. You can't see, you're stunned momentarily, and it gives the individual that's the potential victim to take an attack motive and take the individual down. And if 3 or 4 people that had training, even though they didn't know each other, would simultaneously hit the guy's knees, take him down, and control his arms, the situation could be controlled fairly easily. That doesn't mean that life is going to be beautiful, that people aren't going to get hurt, but it minimizes that to a very large extent and puts the people who are potential victims in control of their own life.